for your patience. Excited to start tonight's agenda, and it looks like we didn't lose. I don't know if we lost any participants, so that's great. Thank you again. So why don't I go ahead and just do the quick overview of the format of tonight's meeting again. Tonight's meeting was there was a wide net cast. We don't seem to have too many new attendees though, but regardless, I'll just share some information about how you can participate tonight. Tonight's meeting is a regular meeting of the Planning Commission. It's being broadcast live on YouTube. It's also being held remotely with the format being Zoom because of COVID-19 and following health order from Wayne County as well as from our township board. So the way that you can participate in this format is by raising your virtual hand, using the chat function, or dialing *9. The main event tonight is to go over where we are with the Sumpter Road Corridor future land use plan. So that will be the only new business item. And other than that, we'll go through the regular order of the start of the agenda here. And with that, I will turn it over for now to our chair, Brian Kelly.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, November 10th, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. And call the meeting to order. And can we have attendance with a roll call, please?
Jeff Jar.
Here.
Brian Cullen.
Here.
Medina Atchison.
Here in Van Buren Township.
Callie Barr.
Here in Van Buren Township as well.
Sherry Budd.
Here in Van Buren Township.
Brian Kelly.
And I am here in Van Buren Township as well.
Me too.
Count me in.
Right. So we have an agenda before us, and do we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
I'll support.
Motion from Commissioner Atchison, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any additions or corrections or comments regarding tonight's agenda? Seeing as we have none, do we have a roll call vote, please?
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Callie Barr.
Yes.
Medina Atchison.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes. So our motion is approved. Our first item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the regular meeting of October 27th, 2021. Do we have a motion to approve the proposed minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Support.
A motion by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Jar. Do we have any additions or corrections or comments regarding the minutes? Seeing as we have no comments, could we please have a roll call vote?
Medina Atchison.
Yes.
Callie Barr.
Yes.
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes. And the motion's approved. So this evening we have no public hearings on the agenda and no old business. So that'll bring us right into the first item under new business, which is the work session for the Sumpter Road Corridor Plan. Planning Commission and Master Plan Consultant McKenna Associates will present a vision statement, draft recommendations for future land use, and a draft regulating plan for the Sumpter Road Corridor from Bemis Road to the city limits of the city of Belleville. We have a motion to move us into work study.
So move. Make a motion to move us into work study.
Motion from Commissioner Cullen. Do we have support?
Yes,
Support.
support that motion.
I'll take Commissioner Barr for support on that. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Callie Barr.
Yes.
Medina Atchison.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes. All right, we're approved, and we are now moving into the work study. I believe we have a presentation from Director Power and staff, as well as some consultants. So I hand this over to Director Power at this time.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. I will begin by just making a few comments about where we last stepped off as a full planning commission on this project. If you recall, at the regular meeting on September 8th, we had gone over some of the good public input we received at the workshop for this Sumpter Road corridor project, which was held at the fire station in late July. So upon going over the public input, we started to broach what that would translate into in terms of an actual future land use plan, set of future land use and access recommendations for this corridor. Resulting from that discussion on September 8th, we established at the direction of the chair a small subcommittee of commissioners. And so we've had participation from Commissioners Atchison, Barr, and Jar. And they were helpful in guiding where we've gone to this point with this process. And we've also had a meeting with that subcommittee and representatives of the city of Belleville and Sumpter Township. So we are thankful for their input as well. Over the course of those three discussions since the September meeting, those discussions with our subcommittee and with our neighbors, we have refined some ideas that we have regarding a future land use amendment for this corridor study area, which relies on understanding that much of the area will become a mixed use district that is tailored to the needs and the context of this part of Van Buren Township and the neighboring communities as well. So with this mixed use district, there's an opportunity for what's considered a form-based code, where you can have a variety of different uses that get sorted into different lot configurations and building types, so that you have a context appropriate set of land uses for the district that can fit in with the neighboring character of the area. So that's kind of a very quick overview of what our consultant from McKenna, Adam Cook, will present in slides. And at certain points in this presentation, we'll go over some of what we're showing on the slides in actual spatial context on the map, invite discussion on the specific areas, and then as well as general discussion, so that we can get some direction to move forward toward more of a final draft version of this plan. And with that, I would like to share my screen with the presentation. And Adam, if you'd prefer to use your slides, just let me know. But otherwise, I'll just take your cues and move through the slides at your direction.
That works fine, Dan. Thank you.
All right. So I'll turn this over to Adam right as soon as I can share my screen. All right.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, commissioners, and special thank you as well to Commissioners Atchison, Barr, and Jar for all of their hard work on the subcommittee. And we've had, as Dan said, several productive meetings over the last couple of months and really worked this thing out, I think, to a fine level. And that's what we're going to go through tonight, and hopefully have enough time to have some thoughtful discussion on it. So Dan, if you want to move on to the next slide. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to talk through the vision statement, proposed future land use map amendments, the proposed regulating plan, and associated building types that go along with the various sub areas in that regulating plan. And lastly, we'll talk about the zoning component of it and the land use component of it. So we'll kick off with the vision statement. Just a little bit of refresher material here. And it really felt good to take this slide, which you've seen once or twice over the last year, and change some of those future tenses to past tenses. And what I mean by that is we've been working to articulate a vision for the future of the Sumpter Road corridor. At this point, we believe we've reached consensus on whether people want to see a different future along Sumpter Road south of Hull Road. And we believe that consensus is generally No, the future should be generally what it is now in terms of a rural feel, open space. But we do recognize that there is allowable development in the current zoning, in the rural preserve zoning district. And so that's a facet of this plan as well, is to look at how we can shape future development along that south part of the Sumpter Road corridor in a way that preserves the rural feel and some of the open space aspects. Lastly, we've received guidance on how properties along Sumpter Road north of Hull can be better utilized for a mix of uses. So commercial uses, offices, light industrial. When we say light industrial, we'll get into that today. We're talking very light industrial and sort of craft-based industrial uses, as well as residential, all intermingling on those parcels. So we can move on. And so let's take a look at our vision statement. The vision statement is kind of in two parts, not dissimilar to the way the vision statement reads in your township-wide 2020 master plan. And so it starts with an introductory section. And it says the Sumpter Road corridor is a southern gateway to Belleville and the economic centers of Van Buren Township. But it also serves as a transition to the rural southern portion of the township. The community's vision for the corridor is embodied in the following principles. Next slide. And so we see the four principles. One is the existing semi-rural character of the corridor will be preserved and protected into the future. Number two, the corridor will accommodate a mix of land uses that are appropriate for its existing character and location within the township. When we say location within the township, we're recognizing that, this corridor isn't a major route for through traffic. It serves relatively local traffic and serves the people, serves the residents, serves the businesses that are located within, a quarter to a half mile of the corridor. And that's what we mean by location within the township. It's within the overall context of the pattern of land use and development in Van Buren Township. Item number three, new buildings along the corridor will be traditional in appearance, appropriately scaled, and adaptable to evolving future circumstances. And number four, Sumpter Road and nearby local streets will be safe, serene, and attractive places for all who use them, including pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. So I think based on our discussions, based on our workshops, our public feedback, everyone, I think, feels very comfortable in being able to summarize everything we heard kind of at a very top level into those four bullet points in terms of where they would like to see the corridor go in the future. We can move on. And so that takes us into proposed future land use map amendments. So if we pull up the next slide that actually has those, what you'll see are some labels in red text, and you'll see some labels in black text. And just to orient everybody, this is a north to south oriented map. The black line that runs from the top to the bottom is Sumpter Road, even though there is no Sumpter Road label. And you can see the two crossroads, Hull Road and Bemis Road. And you can see those labels in red are the proposed future land use category changes. And the labels in black are the existing future land use categories that are not proposed to change. So when you see the medium density single family A residential category there on the northwest corner of Hull and Sumpter, that's the existing Cheney subdivision. There's no proposed change for that future land use designation. Likewise, further to the south along Hull Road, that light green coloring that's labeled rural settlement. Again, that's what it currently is categorized, and there's no proposed future change. Where the proposed changes come into play are where we see the aqua colors clustered there on the north side of the corridor, and then in a couple places towards the south side of the corridor there, south of Hull and as well at the Bemis Road intersection. We're calling that Sumpter mixed use. And so that's a variation on the mixed use future land use category, which in the 2020 master plan specifically has a stipulation that, when this category is developed for various areas, because, a number of areas throughout the township, including a number of areas along the Sumpter Road corridor, are currently categorized on that map as mixed use, but with the caveat that those areas need to be planned at a specific level, at a local level, which of course is what we've done here. And so that sort of instantiation of mixed use now has kind of evolved into Sumpter mixed use. And of course, we're going to discuss what that means. Sumpter mixed use does extend to some parcels that currently have other future land use designations that are not just the generic mixed use designation. So when you get down closer to Hall Road, there are a couple of small parcels that are currently categorized as local commercial. There are 2 parcels that are you currently see shaded as the aqua color that are today categorized as local commercial. They're on the south side of Hall, as well as the parcels there surrounding Bemis Road. Those currently have a local commercial designation, which is proposed all of them to be changed into the Sumpter mixed use category. There is one other proposed category, which you see in the kind of brighter green color, and that surrounds the 2 mixed use areas that immediately front the corners there of Sumpter Road and Hall Road. And we refer to those as Sumpter Rural Settlement. And again, we can get into more of what that means as we progress, but basically the Sumpter Rural Settlement is a way for the existing single family kind of development that could be allowed under the what they call the agricultural preserve zoning category, would still be allowed to develop on those parcels, but that it would have to be clustered. And there would be some design considerations for, the lot sizes, the building types in terms of what types of single family homes are built, and ensuring that some of the open space on those parcels gets preserved. Again, in keeping with the vision that we want to preserve as much of the rural feel of that area as possible. So Dan, I think we can probably move on to the regulating plan. So when we talk about a regulating plan, when we have, a number of parcels taken together and we call them as a future land use category, Sumpter mixed use, when we get down into kind of the nitty gritty of figuring out, what does that look like? We then get into, as Dan mentioned, the concept of form-based zoning. And when you do form-based zoning or form-based coding for an area, a regulating plan works similar to how a zoning map might work, only it's looking at a much more granular level of kind of a parcel by parcel level. And if we go forward one slide, we can look at that proposed regulating plan. And we can see that there are several different colors shown. So this is, we're zooming in here. We didn't, just for clarity purposes, we didn't want to show all the way down and show those 2 corners at Bemis, but those 2 corners at Bemis are also going to look very similar to this. But when we kind of zoom in here, where we have a lot of complexity and a lot of existing development, along the corridor, we can see that these parcels then get classified into really 4 sort of distinct categories in this regulating plan. And we start with what are called anchor lots. So those anchor lots, again, are those 2 areas on the immediate southeast and southwest corners of the Hall Road, Sumpter Road intersection. One small portion of the southwest corner is currently occupied by the Citgo gas station and convenience store. And this would apply to that parcel, the area immediately around it, and sort of a mirroring of that area on the other corner. And those sort of the concept behind the anchor lots is to have a kind of small scale rural and feel, or to allow a small scale rural and feel mix of uses that are more commercial in nature, that would satisfy the demand and the needs of local residents in the area. That, we did hear repeatedly that they would like to see some more local services come to the area. The next category you see on this map is landlocked lots. And what you'll see is that's kind of a yellow greenish color. And those apply to several parcels that are further back from Sumpter Road. You can see that currently they have no direct access via the road network or the street network. Rouleau Avenue currently kind of dead ends into one of them, but there's no actual direct frontage onto that parcel. And then the other parcels are sort of completely isolated back there. 3 of them do have frontage directly on the railroad tracks, but otherwise there is no road access back to those landlocked lots. The darker purple lots, you can see we call those primary lots, and they're called deep primary lots. And for the simple reason that not all of them, but most of them follow a pattern of being very narrow, having a very narrow frontage on Sumpter Road, where they can be accessed, and then a very long depth. I mean, going back 1,000 feet or more back to the west of Sumpter Road. And what that's resulted in is this sort of very fragmented pattern where you have relatively active and intense uses towards the eastern end of those lots. So in some cases, they're single family residential. Behind that, you may have accessory structures and some outbuildings, and you can tell that land is under active use. But then about 1/3 of the way back, you can see that land is inactively used. And that really goes for all of the different land uses along here. Well, it's predominantly single family residential. There are a handful of light industrial properties. There are some commercial properties as well. And one of the issues that came up during this process is looking at ways to potentially unlock additional value for property owners in this area, that have access to these properties that really are sort of inefficiently platted and don't have any rear access. And one of the things that this plan takes into account is what might change in the future if rear access were provided, say via an extension of Rouleau Avenue to the north or via an extension of Back Road to the north. That would allow those property owners to gain additional value that's currently just sitting there very underutilized. In contrast, you have shallow primary lots, and those are the lighter purple colors there. And those shallow primary lots are all of the lots on the eastern side of Sumpter Road. And that's the area that there's a lot of kind of a sawtooth pattern where you have lots zigzagging back and forth between Township jurisdiction and City of Belleville jurisdiction. But then you also have lots classified as shallow primary lots there on the west side of Sumpter Road in the vicinity of that Cheney subdivision, where the platting pattern is a lot more regular, and there are regular intersecting cross streets. So with a regulating plan, the way it works under a form-based code is that each of those areas kind of operate like zones, not exactly in a traditional zoning ordinance, but they operate in the sense that since a form-based code regulates the form, as I've explained, or the building types that could be permitted, variations on those building types. The way a regulating plan like this gets broken down is that each of those areas have a menu of building types that are allowable, either as by right uses or as special land uses in each of those areas. So you can kind of think of these lot designations on this regulating plan as almost sub areas, if you will, of the overall Sumpter mixed use zoning category. And so, Dan, if we get into the next slide.
Yes, and just to quickly add to that, it's I think that what Adam just explained is key. These districts or these colors within the regulating plan distinguish themselves by the allowance of different built form on each of the categories. So different building types. So what we're going to do, we're going to go a little bit back and forth here to kind of reinforce this concept by talking about the building types, but then we'll end up going back and referring back to these categories and districts. And at that point, I'll start to invite some question and discussion. But first, let's go through, as Adam said, we'll go through the building types. And I will turn it to the next slide so we can start to do that.
Great. So rather than, again, I think it makes sense to just mainly go through the building types, and then we'll go back and we'll key them into the various areas as illustrated on the regulating plan. It's actually a relatively simple menu of building types, and we'll go through all of them now. There really aren't that many. And then there are some just slight variations as to which building types are permitted versus accessory versus special uses in the various areas of the regulating plan. So we'll start with cottage retail. And you can see we've got a built example on the right, and we've got a sort of general diagram. And this type of a diagram, and if you're familiar with the mixed use district in the current zoning ordinance, you'll see very similar diagrams to this in that portion of the ordinance. What we hope to do is have this result in a very similar looking mixed use ordinance or mixed use district within the zoning ordinance for the Sumpter corridor. But you can see sort of the idealized version of a cottage retail building and then what one looks like out in the field. And, these are fairly self-explanatory. This is a building that, allows for some retail use to take place on the ground floor, but then can also work as a residential building. Could work maybe as a bed and breakfast even. It could have sort of a mixed component. It's not a purely commercial building like what you might see in a downtown. It also takes the form of a more residential building, like a large house, like a large farmhouse or something of that nature. And again, this is very common in the sort of semi-rural hamlet or village context that you see in the Midwest. And if you've been to Dixboro, which is a little bit outside of Ann Arbor on the east side of town on Plymouth Road, you can see the Dixboro General Store there illustrated as one example. But there are many spread throughout rural and semi-rural Michigan that you're likely familiar with. Let's move on to the next one. So the next building type we call a liner building, and this may be somewhat new in concept, but realistically, a liner building is simply a commercial fronted building, but it's very narrow. It has a very low cost of construction, and it has a narrow depth. So going back from the frontage line, going back from where you would enter the building on the front, you would maybe go back 20, 25. No more than 50 feet at the very maximum end of the scale. What that does is that allows for lower construction costs, that allows for lower rents, that allows for a more flexible type of commercial and or office use to populate these spaces. And I think one of the issues that we've heard a lot, is that the Sumpter corridor is populated with some of these aging strip center type properties, and not all of them are within the township jurisdiction. The largest one is actually within Belleville's jurisdiction. But to the average user of the corridor, they all see that as part and parcel of the same thing. And you see a lot of failed businesses and a lot of vacancies in there. And I think the response to that is that those types of properties were built for, a much different style of retail, which is not nearly as robust as it was 40 or 50 years ago, and is likely on the wane, which is the kind of chain corporate format retail that requires large floor plates, that requires, sort of large parking areas, loading areas. And all of those things add to sort of a greater carrying cost to the developer of some property like that. And then, of course, translates into higher rents. With the liner building format, what we're able to do, particularly on these shallow primary lots that we showed, is have a very, easy, efficient way to, develop along that right-of-way line, develop buildings that, are flexible, can support a wide variety of commercial uses, and again are cheap to build, and thus they're cheap for small scale entrepreneurs to occupy. And if we look at the built example, this is one called Mashpee Commons, and this was actually a very suburban area. This is out on Cape Cod, and in the 1960s, a very kind of traditional, kind of sprawl environment commercial area was built. And beginning in the 1980s, it was retrofitted into more of a town center, traditional town center, Main Street environment. And one of the tools they used was to deploy these liner buildings along long stretches of road where parking lots currently exist. So if we think about some of the strip centers there along the Sumpter corridor, it's possible to think about lining that corridor with buildings similar to this. I think architecturally, they would look a little bit more Midwestern in their vernacular. This is definitely more of a older East Coast vernacular that was achieved there on Cape Cod, but it made sense, of course, for that area. But if we look at just the general size, scale, and dimensions of the building in that photo, I think that's what we're going after when we talk about adding this to the Sumpter corridor. And you can see in our kind of typical diagram there on the left what that might look like in a little bit more of a traditional Midwestern context. So go on to the next one. The next one is your mixed use building. And the mixed use building is, really one of the basic kind of form-based code 101 buildings. You see them in a lot of different contexts. You do see them in downtown Main Street contexts. And, if we were looking at a downtown Main Street, like if we think about downtown Belleville and some of the new buildings that are going up and some of the older buildings that exist in downtown Belleville, we see a lot of these. But they can also occur, they can be built in, a more rural or a semi-rural context, or a village context, or a hamlet context. Just one example is, again, it's another East Coast example. So, the architectural ornamentation and detailing might look a little bit different from how it would look in Michigan or the Midwest. But Waterford, Virginia is another little rural kind of a hamlet style village on the far outskirts. It's near Leesburg, if you're familiar with the Washington area. So it's on the far outskirts of the Washington area. And it's a village that grew to a point where it could support these, mixed use buildings. Even though this is, again, more of a traditional colonial style, it sets a precedent to say that, this has happened for hundreds of years. We've had these types of buildings, and that they are appropriate for the rural or the semi-rural environment if done properly. And that means, paying attention to the overall dimensions, the massing, not going over 2 stories, and making sure that the vernacular architecture is used. Let's go on to the next one, Dan. Next one is retail building. The retail building is even more basic than the mixed use, because we're only looking at, within the confines of that building, we're only looking at one use, and that one use is retail. Again, these buildings, you're probably quite familiar with them. We see them all over Michigan. We see them in all sorts of contexts. The one I'm showing you on this slide is from Ferndale. And this isn't in downtown Ferndale. This is actually tucked way back in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And these were built frequently, prior to the mid 20th century, as corner stores and neighborhood services, built back in the middle of walkable neighborhoods. These are also appropriate for a semi-rural type of a context, and basically would look really not dissimilar from a nice simple brick building like this one. Go on to the next one. I don't have a built example for this, because this is really an open-ended kind of a building type. We call this artisan, studio, craft, and culinary. This is a light industrial building, but when I say light, I'm talking about very light industrial. This is the type of building that could be an artisan studio or a collection of artisan studios. If you think about small-scale printmakers or artists or potters or something of that nature. Art studios. They could be, small metalsmithing studios, small workshops, something where a commercial component is tied to a production component. but that production doesn't create the types of externalities that you would normally get when we think of, in the traditional zoning, when we think of a light industrial versus a medium versus a heavy industrial. We're talking a very, very light industrial. The word culinary is in there. These could be purposed as, small scale, production kitchens or community kitchens for people that are baking commercially but don't have their own storefront or bakery. So this is very much almost like a cottage style of building. You could, like I said, you could do small scale production out of these. I think the key thing to take away from a diagram like this is look at the scale. If you notice, we always put a person in these diagrams so we can kind of get a sense of how big a building is relative to the average person. You can see this is very small. That's not a 10 or a 12 foot tall individual. It's not intended to be in that photograph. That's about somebody of average height. And so you're really looking at a one-story building of no more than 10 to 12 feet high. You're really looking at small dimensions, variety of potential configurations. So it's very flexible building type and really kind of an unassuming kind of traditional simple architecture. Let's move on. We talk about a barn, and we've had a lot of discussion about this because a barn means many things, right? A barn traditionally has meant commercial agriculture, right? Which does come with externalities, which comes with all sorts of things when you think about a barn being filled with livestock, and hay and things like that. But the barn typology, has been adapted because we've had so many barns that have gone out of service from commercial production, and they've been adapted for many things, and we're all familiar with them. So Dexter, Michigan, the cider mill there is, this is actually a new barn type building that they built to complement the old, centuries old barn that was originally the home of the mill. And they built this addition onto it to be architecturally compatible. But when we think of the barn type of building, this is what we're aiming at, is something that could actually be used as, a commercial venture. There could be, again, a low externality, small scale craft or production component taking place in this building. For example, a cider mill or anything else kind of on that level, but there could also be a storefront built into it. It doesn't have to be a necessarily, a smelly or a, rundown kind of livestock environment. When we think of a barn, this is something that, allows for that kind of rustic rural feel to carry forward, but also provide a building type for someone to really have the flexibility to do a creative concept like this, or it could simply be used as an accessory building and used as a traditional kind of a storage building that has a little bit of flexibility to grow as properties change hands over the years, or as people's lifestyle needs change. Let's move on. The next one we call a kiln house. And our designer, Mike Campbell, who works on a lot of these things, that's his term for this. And I like it. It's, I Googled the term kiln house and didn't find many references to it. And, I think it actually fits the bill quite well. This is something that you might think of if you were doing pottery. This is the type of small house style building that you might use to, have a kiln and fire the pottery. But we're not necessarily assuming that would be the only potential use, because that's a very specialized use. If we want to take this into a real world example, you can see there on the right, I'm showing some artists' cottages. And this is in a little development down in central Georgia. It's called the cottages at Serenby. Or Serenby, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but Palmetto, Georgia, and you can Google this and see other pictures. Dan recently visited Sedona, Arizona, or maybe not so recently, but I know Dan was talking about the artist cottages down there. And I thought about showing those, but again, when we're talking about Southwest, we're in a totally different architectural environment. But from the standpoint of the light building footprint and the types of uses that these are appropriate for. This is kind of the vision behind the Kiln House building. And again, you can see in this Georgia example, this is very much a cultivated kind of semi-rural environment where these cottages are kind of nestled, deep in the trees. You have gravel pathways, even though they're accessible and they have, kind of modern fittings on them. You really kind of marry the, kind of urban commercial aspects with a very rural rustic environment there. Next building type, makerspace building. I think I've shown this Ann Arbor t-shirt example in a few presentations to the Van Buren Township, as well as some other communities I work with, because I like it so much. And it's really a good example of, what would a building type look like that had a retail shopfront component, something that was open to the public on a regular basis, but also had an adjacent space that could be used, again, for small scale storage and production. And, from time to time, some of those spaces require, direct vehicular access to the building. And so this is one idea of how that might look. So we can see with the Ann Arbor T-shirt company, they do have their T-shirts there on prominent display in their windows in that sort of retail shopfront component. You can go in there during business hours and shop and look around and buy T-shirts. And then immediately adjacent, they have that storage component to the building, which in this case has a garage door access, but they've cleaned it up, very nicely. It doesn't look like your traditional industrial building because they've done a nice stucco treatment on their exterior wall. They've done a mural, and they've done some really nice signage. This is the type of building that, again, used to really populate areas on the kind of urban rural fringe before we started really hyper kind of zoning things into industrial parks and putting those buildings kind of far back in little pods. Back when buildings lined the roads, you would see buildings that had, a combination of shop front and garage doors and vehicular access. And I think this would be appropriate for certain areas on the Sumpter corridor with, certain design requirements, so that, for example, your garage door can't go more than maybe 15 or 16 feet high, which fundamentally limits what types of vehicles can access it. A delivery van, for example, would be able to access it, but a full-size semi-truck wouldn't. It's ideas like that, it's elements like that help us, constrain, uses from becoming too intense, and keeping that light industrial that is part of the vision as truly being a light industrial use. Let's go on to the next one. The next couple, I don't think we have photos because they're really self-explanatory. Accessory workshop building. It's basically a little bit larger garage. And again, we're going to talk about how those can be sequenced into these various areas on the regulating plan. Let's look at the next two. I believe these are the last two, the accessory dwelling unit, which we can talk about in a little bit more detail. You're likely familiar with the concept of the accessory dwelling unit. Obviously would be tied to a principal residential unit or a single family house. In some cases, it would incorporate, a detached, what you would see there on the right, where you have the simple detached garage. In some cases, you can take that garage and then stack a small residential unit above it, or behind it, or beside it, and you can call that an ADU. In some cases, the ADU is just a small cottage that doesn't have a garage component. There are multiple ways to do it, but the key is that it's, of course, tied to a principal residential use, and it's very small scale. So in terms of, the floor plate in there, you might limit it to, 800 square feet or 850 square feet, which is, a studio or a one bedroom type of flat. And I think at this point, Dan, we're going to then go into the various lot types. And is that something you wanted to pull up your interactive map for before we go through these, or after?
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. So good comments. I think this is where we could introduce, and we'll want to maybe give the planning commissioners a chance to refer back to the building types, but maybe if you want to just give a brief overview of what you have on this slide, and then what I would like to do is show the planning commission in context what these lot types actually look like in the district by showing the map. So,
Okay.
and then I want to give pause. I know that's we've had a lot of information so far, and there'll be more information after we look at the map. So I want to give a chance to go over each of these categories that we're going to talk about with some discussion from the planning commission. So, but Adam, why don't you overview this slide, and then we'll switch over to the map.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so I know we've thrown a little bit at you, and we'll try to go through this and explain it as clearly as possible. So when we talk about anchor lots, as you recall, the anchor lots are those lots immediately on the southeast and southwest corners of Sumpter and Hall, and again on the northeast and northwest corners of Sumpter and Bemis. And again, the vision for those lots really is to have a kind of rural commercial environment that serves surrounding residents. And that could be via, a mix of things. Again, we don't want to plan for, a kind of a prepackaged concept the way you would if you were to simply do this as general commercial and just allow big box or strip malls to come in. What you've seen in this kind of intro where we flipped through all of the building types really is to show that with a limited palette of building types that are, appropriately designed, you can really accommodate a flexible range of uses that would appeal to, not only creative entrepreneurs, but also some more traditional retail concepts without having to go all the way to, kind of just repeating the same sort of suburban pattern in an area where that probably wouldn't be as welcome. And so when we look at anchor lots, we call them layers. That's kind of a fancy term, but just think about sort of in general, the front and the rear. So when we talk about toward the front, these are the portions of the lots that would abut the street. So directly accessing Sumpter Road or directly accessing Hull Road or Bemis Road right at those corners. And then when we say secondary layer, meaning, toward the rear, what other types of buildings might you see behind? So again, we have really the commercial building typologies that we went through there in the primary layer. So that could be a liner building. That could be your kind of rural vernacular mixed use building or simple retail building, or that could be a cottage retail building. And then secondarily behind that, those might be complemented by some of these smaller scale craft or production type buildings, like the artisan studio craft culinary, or like the barn, or the kiln house or the workshop. So, one potential concept could be, imagine, a really nice cottage retail building there fronting one of those corners with that barn type building behind it, maybe connected by some informal parking or by a gravel lot. And maybe that's a cider mill, or maybe that's a country market, that has a traditional storefront there in the cottage retail building, and then maybe there's some additional commercial space or some production space for cider and or wine in a artisan studio type of layout behind it, or even in a barn similar to what we saw in Dexter behind it. It's groupings of these smaller scale buildings that can house a mixture of commercial and productive uses as well, I think, is the vision for those anchor lots.
Thank you, Adam. So, and I think with the remainder of these, I think it'll be best served kind of just improving here, but I think it will be good to go over these right on the map. So we'll toggle back to the slides, but let's go right to the map to show these anchor lots in context, just to give people a sense of what we're describing here. So if everybody can see this map, it's available now to all the planning commission to kind of click on and dig into a little bit. So when we talk about these anchor lots, you can see the black outline on the mixed use parcels here. And what we're describing is these lots that are going to define kind of the gateway into the district up here at Hull Road, and then the gateway into the township down there at Bemis Road. The only example of anything built on any of these lots right now is the Citgo gas station. Otherwise, these are primarily agricultural or undeveloped, but they could serve as this kind of anchor to define the district and define the township. And so if you click on this map, and this is just a quick tutorial, you go to more information, you can find the kind of the definition and the list that Adam just went through. And then you can see here where, just like Adam said, on these anchor lots, we really want to emphasize the architectural character of the building in the front and have kind of a robust use that may have a commercial component and kind of bring some formality to these corners. And that's where those building types come in. But situated behind those, you might have buildings with an accessory or auxiliary function that serve some of maybe the production or industry that helps to foster the business in the front of the lot. So that would be the idea here. I do want to show one other thing in reference to the map. If you take a look at this map, one thing that you can do if you're curious about the regulating plan as it's laid out, you can always search an address. If you're familiar with a certain parcel, you can zoom in somewhere if you have an idea of where something is. And another thing to know is that you have the adjacent zoning in the city of Belleville. One thing that we really wanted to do is to make sure that we have some understanding of the context of the surrounding area. And so you will see some colors on this map that represent the current zoning in the city of Belleville. So that's just something to keep in mind moving forward through the rest of this presentation, is that you'll see some of our mixed use areas and their adjacency to these more solid color. For example, here is a city of Belleville's own lot at the shopping plaza. So with that really quick overview, let's go back into now talking about the next type of lot on the next slide, and I'll get to that, which is the shallow frontage lot. So Adam, why don't you describe that? And actually, I'll just pull it right up on the map again. So shallow frontage lots, you're looking at these ones outlined in red. And Adam, if you want, I'll pull up one of the images, one of the sheets that shows the building types here. And then we'll give a break for discussion because we will have gone through two of the categories.
All right, thanks, Dan. And so for our shallow frontage lots, or primary shallow frontage lots, again, this is, the context here is we've got a checkerboard of some smaller parcels on the west side of Sumpter Road, adjacent to the Cheney subdivision, and then as well as the east side of Sumpter Road. And there currently exist a variety of land uses along these. We have, the former lumber yard. We have some single family residential. We have some light industrial. We have some, professional service. I know there's a veterinary office in one of those buildings. And I think this is probably sort of has the greatest flexibility in terms of, what the future could hold for these lots under, sort of a new development regulations. So again, we talk about primary and secondary layer. These aren't really that deep. What categorizes these lots is, for the most part, they're really maybe 300 feet deep maximum. Now, there are some on the very north end of the corridor that are a little bit deeper, but for the most part, they're not particularly deep. When we talk about toward front and toward rear, again, we're simply referring to, what types of buildings are directly interfacing with the roads on which they front, and then what types of buildings are behind those and generally out of sight. So when we talk about primary layer, this list is a little bit out of order, but we have first and foremost the single family residential. And the caveat for developing single-family residential on these parcels would be if access exists to a residential side street. There are already access management challenges along Sumpter as it is. And I think also by studying kind of the way that the existing side streets have been platted that empty out onto Sumpter, it's appropriate for single family residential to be constructed in those locations, but they would need to be oriented toward a side street rather than oriented toward Sumpter Road. Then we get into the more commercial building types. Again, we get back into what we saw for the anchor lots. So it could be a liner building. Particularly if there is an instance where there's maybe an underdeveloped or underperforming retail property with front-loaded parking. That might be an appropriate place for a liner building. Of course, as we've seen before, the mixed-use building, the retail building, or the cottage retail building, all of those could be appropriate for those locations. And then we add one other building type into the shallow primary lot type. And this is maybe more appropriate for some of the areas immediately bordering the railroad and bordering the city of Belleville, but that would be the makerspace building type, which is a very, very light industrial type that does have some vehicular access to the building, but again, has a retail storefront and has, sort of design limitations on it to ensure that it doesn't become as intensely used as some of the buildings that you see if you drive back inside the Davenport Industrial Park and look around, for example. We're not talking about anything nearly as intense as that being purposed for one of these makerspace type buildings. And so, those are the primary layer kind of front buildings. And then for kind of the rear buildings is very, very basic. Accessory dwelling unit, again, assuming that you have a principal residential unit there, meaning a single family house, an ADU would be allowed toward the rear. Alternatively, the traditional detached garage or shed type, depending on what the primary building type was there. So I think the typology that's fairly simple, but at the same time, it does allow those parcels to flex between more of a residential and more of a very light industrial use that directly interfaces with the corridor itself.
And now's a good opportunity, I would say, to kind of take a breath and think about what we just heard. We've talked about two of the lot types now, both of which have a role in defining some of the frontage in this district. So you see some of the more formal building types here. And right before I get into finally letting the Planning Commission ask some questions and the audience ask some questions, I will just mention one overarching concept of zoning and planning that everybody should keep in mind is that this is the plan that we want to see materialize as potentially that the Planning Commission wants to see materialize as property owners choose to redevelop. In most cases, we're pushing this process to happen, organically, where somebody would actually choose to redevelop in this manner. I'm saying that because there are properties that are currently zoned a certain way, and as of the way things are right now, this plan wouldn't preempt somebody from continuing to use or develop their property under their current zoning, but it does guide them toward future rezoning decisions. So that's just something else to keep in mind as we look at this map. It's not what we're enforcing today, but hopefully gradually as properties develop and redevelop. So with that in mind, having seen the mix of building types and the descriptions of these anchor parcels, which again are at the corners, the shallow frontage lots, which line the Rouleau subdivision, line the east side of the road here, places like the veterinary clinics up at the northeast end of our study area, places like the Cork and Bottle site. Any questions? Now is the time to poke holes in what we're saying, to let us know what some of the problem areas are, some of the red flags that you see. And that goes for the Planning Commission as well as any members of the audience. The planning commissioners have at it. Please feel free to ask any questions or discuss anything about those areas we've went over so far.
Director Power?
Yes.
Can I just ask a real quick clarification? Since we are in work study, this can be more of an informal free flow of information, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So we can openly ask questions. Do we ask through the chair or do we ask directly to you in the process?
With the work study, you can just ask direct to Director Power or Mr. Cook or even communicate between the commissioners.
Okay.
It's a very informal conversation to be held regarding the proposal that we're going through.
Okay. My question is, what are the anchor lot sizes approximately? What size are you looking at for those lots to be?
Yep. Thanks for the question. So the current master plan has a stretch that's already planned for the local commercial designation, that planned local commercial strip extends as far as you see on this map, east and west. Now this map does show these lots going farther south. It kind of squares them off. Adam and I may have to get back to you, but I believe they're either 600 by 600 or 800 by 800. So that's about the size, and that would provide some kind of a focused area in which you build in a way that still is able to connect, for example, the public sanitary sewer on Hull Road. But I can certainly look that up, maybe get back to you by the end of the meeting with the exact dimensions.
Well, I'm not worried about it. I'm looking because if you're looking at a strip mall, how long is the strip mall going to be roughly to fit into that type of area? By strip mall, I'm referring to the liner designation. And I would think that we'd also want to look to make sure that we had room for parking in the rear, because Hull Road or Sumpter Road gets very busy and it'd be very difficult, I think, to have parking along the road itself. I don't know. That's my feeling on it.
Yeah, I would echo what Dan said. I think we're looking at maybe 500 to 600 feet linear on either side, which equates to very rough calculation about 8 acres on either side of Sumpter Road. And when you're looking at, I know that looks relatively small, on a map, but from a site planning perspective, you actually do a heck of a lot with these building types. If you have a 500-foot linear frontage, and you were to do liner buildings for even part of it, a liner building, again, from a retail space there, you're looking at maybe, a 30-foot depth and, 25-foot, maybe 20 to 25-foot width, of a storefront. So, you're really looking at maybe a block of those extending 100 feet at the most before you would have a gap or an access point in it. So, and that's just one example.
Yep. Thanks, Evan. That was a really good question, Commissioner Cullen. Another way to look at that is if you look here, you might see this red stretch here. That's the existing Belleville Plaza shopping center. And you're talking about a couple of, if you zoom in, you can see the kind of parking configuration they have there. You do have two-way access and miles of conventional parking throughout that site. So these are significantly sized parcels. Now, when you get into the shallow frontage lots, that's where you're going to have more of a form that is likely to push up toward the right of way and have parking behind. And in some cases on the east side of the road, you may have what you'll see in our recommendations in some areas is something called a slip street, where you'd have a kind of a parallel path for cars to enter a site and then park in front of a building along a shared access drive. So those are narrower sites, but they can still accommodate a fair amount of parking. A good question. It's something to look out for. Why don't I just so we can feel maybe less that the map is imposing on us, why don't we have everybody up on the screen here. Any other questions about the anchor or shallow frontage lots?
Director Power, are we looking at some of these continuing with what we did with cross access easements and things? So to go with what Commissioner Cullen was mentioning, where we would have the lots behind when you're adding in the parking, you can have it where you're mentioning the slip streets, but you could have it in the back like a boulevard or something else that connects some of the lots. Kind of like that other one, the parcel that you just brought up. So are we envisioning some kind of issue to help with cars just blindly pulling out onto the road?
Yep, and that's where zoning comes in. Zoning is the tool that enables us to actually activate these things. And the zoning ordinance, as it currently stands, does have recommendations for minimum distance between commercial driveways, for example. It refers to cross access, and that's something that we on the zoning and site plan review side always look for as well. So you'll see comments in this report echoing some of those principles of cross access, access easements and shared access drives, and consolidating driveways so that you don't have too many spaced together or pushed together on the main road. Good question. Any other questions from our other commissioners on the anchor or shallow frontage lots? All right, we can always come back to it. And I know we are pressing into the night here. So why don't we go ahead and talk about the other lot types? Adam, if we want to jump into, I believe the next category is going to be the deep frontage lot type. And I'll put that up on the screen here. So as I pull this up and kick it back over to Adam, I'll just mention that the mind's eye is going to think of all of the homes north of the Rulo subdivision on the west side of Sumpter Road as meeting this category. With a few exceptions, these are largely currently used residentially, but it's worth pointing out that a lot of this area is actually currently zoned industrially. So a relic of the proximity to some industrial use in the city of Belleville and the adjacency to the railroad. A lot of the parcels up here are currently zoned industrially. They've been built as home sites. I think powers that be saw the potential for future industrial use here, but now we're kind of revisiting this and seeing where we want to give the ability for continued use of residential in these areas, but also for some creative ways to enable people to maybe make things and produce things at a small scale on these lots. So Adam, I will pull up one of these lots as an example and put up the image of the deep frontage lot type. You can go over the building types.
Okay. So when we're talking about deep frontage, again, just to echo that point, you've got a number of parcels that really are, kind of inefficiently platted in the sense that they're very long, they're very narrow, and there's no access to the rear. And so this is where I think we've had probably the most discussion on, how these might look in a future context where access is granted to the rear, and what that might, the possibilities that might open up for, a property owner to potentially develop more of that property from a, front to back, or to even split that property and then allow a purchaser of what was the back portion of one of those long lots. Now, assuming they have access via a new road, how would that develop? Because the rear now kind of becomes the front, so to speak. So what we're talking about is, when you think about layers, we're talking about primary layer. Now we're getting a little bit, more specific. So when we talk about primary layer, we're talking about really the first 300 feet of depth on one of these long parcels. And then the secondary layer being everything beyond, that 300 feet of depth. So primary layer, we're looking at maybe a more limited palette of buildings for these lots. So they would include the single family residential. They'd include the cottage retail building. And then at the rear of those buildings, potentially an accessory dwelling unit or a detached garage or an accessory shed. So even within that primary layer, you would still have buildings functioning as accessory buildings to primary buildings. And those primary buildings, again, a fairly limited palette because right now they define the character of that Sumpter corridor, which is that kind of quasi-rural single-family settlement pattern that you see there along the west side of the road. But that's not to suggest that a cottage retail type of building couldn't coexist, or a residential style building couldn't coexist that's performing very small scale retail function. So then we talk about the secondary layer. Now we're thinking about, okay, beyond 300 feet of depth, what might be developed back there, especially assuming that rear access might be granted at some point in the future. And that's where we get into sort of a bigger palette of more of the craft-oriented and the very light industrial building types. And again, that's where you see the artisan, studio, craft, culinary. I think we need to have a less complex name for that building type, but that's what we're talking about. The barn building type, the kiln house. And again, things like the workshop, the detached garage, the accessory dwelling unit. The idea is that, if this kind of becomes an area where organically, some of these very light industrial or craft type of uses, propagate back there at the rear, assuming that, rear access is granted. Then you get into a scenario where, over time, potentially some of those parcels get split off. And then if they get split off, now you're looking at really very kind of unique sort of kind of light industrial kind of maker district back in there. That would also have potentially single family residential. I think what this slide doesn't convey is that if at some point in the future, one of these lots were split, say down the middle, and now you have a rear lot that's formed right out of one of these deep lots that has access via, a new road, I think you would permit single family residential to co-locate back there with some of these other building types so that it doesn't just become, another kind of quasi-industrial district. It really becomes more of a, artisanal kind of maker district. But people can live back there too if they so choose.
Thanks, Adam. So I think this palette is comparable to the landlocked palette. So I think we're going to go into talking about the landlocked lot type, and then we can get into further questions about these other two categories within the mixed use district. So let me go back to the map and point out you're gonna see some lots back here that exist currently without frontage, and that's where we have the idea to talk about the landlocked type for this district. So I'll bring open that sheet, and Adam, if you want to go into that.
Certainly, and again, the landlocked, this is almost an adjunct of kind of the deep lots, because now we're looking very much at the rear. We're looking at parcels that have no road access, in some cases railroad adjacency, but not direct access. And they're much larger. They're much larger parcels. And so, if there were a way in the future to access them, this would kind of, I think, open up more of the full palette of building types, less of the, purely commercial building types, but really more of the, adaptable kind of mixed use types that we've shown in this family, right? So single family residential, and then beyond that, you have the cottage retail, you have the artisan studio, craft culinary, you have the barn, you have the kiln house, you have the workshop, plus the kind of standard accessory buildings, meaning the ADU. So a single family house gets developed back there that can potentially come part and parcel with an ADU if that property owner so chose. And then, of course, your accessory shed and your detached garage. This is the types of very basic structures, that serve really as outbuildings to almost anything, not just a residential structure. And so again, that's not deviating really at all from the idea from the rear of those deep lots. You're looking at, over time, if the development pattern does start to form from kind of front, meaning front Sumpter, west toward the rear of those lots, and then further west onto those larger parcels that currently don't have access. You're really going from, a Sumpter frontage that is still going to be predominantly single family residential with some commercial options that architecturally are very compatible with the single family residential, into kind of an environment that has a lot more of these flexible building types mixed in with single family homes, if people chose to go that route. And I mean, I think that sums it up for really the four types. And inside baseball is that I think with Dan and with our subcommittee, we experimented with a number of other sort of lot types on these draft regulating plans. And we're actually able to consolidate it into four lot types, which I like. I think that's very, very simple, because we found that we had, I think, 6 or 7 at one time. And we found a number of them to be redundant. So I think this actually is a very, it's really kind of become a very, I don't know what a good word is, but sort of light and easy to use and understand scheme for what, is kind of a maybe more complex problem than what we thought 6 or 8 months ago when we started looking at this corridor.
Thanks, Adam. Just one kind of detail thing to build onto the landlocked type. You may be thinking, well, these are landlocked parcels. Are they really buildable? So I think the premise here, just to keep in mind, is that, as Adam mentioned, we will eventually potentially see the extension of a street like Rouleau or Bach Road that would kind of daylight these parcels. And we'd want to anticipate what that would look like. And the difference between maybe a deep frontage lot and a landlocked lot is that you are not defining the frontage of the main corridor of Sumpter Road on these landlocked parcels like you are on the frontage lots. So you're going to see a more kind of localized and residential maker oriented use, as opposed to a commercial oriented, or not use, but building type, as opposed to a commercial building type established back there if that road gets built. That being said, now that we've gone over those other 2 types, general questions or concerns, any comments, questions, concerns about those lot types and building types? All right. I want to keep the lines of communication open, everybody. So if you think of anything, if you click around on that map and something comes up, please feel free to send that to us. Before we really wrap up, there are a couple of other important aspects of the plan that's been developed so far. So I'm going to turn this back over to Adam to get into those last few slides. And kind of as a closer for the mixed use regulating plan lot types that we just went over, I do want to thank our partners with the city of Belleville and Sumpter Township. We had Deputy Supervisor O'Connell with Sumpter Township and City Manager and Police Chief Robinson with the city of Belleville with us last week to help guide some of our conversation here. And it was very helpful. So they and anybody else who wants to make comment, please feel free to in the rest of this discussion. But why don't we get through the last few slides here, Adam? I'll turn that back over to the slide deck and you can take it from there.
Okay, I think this is this slide is fairly open-ended because, we talked about building form and, in that library, that palette of building types, in a lot of cases, those really put constraints, the way you can regulate those building types, those put constraints on the uses that can fundamentally take place. So, if you say, okay, we can allow for a small makerspace type building, that has a small workspace adjacent to a retail space that has a garage door that can be no more than 15 feet high, you're not going to get a major logistics center or distribution center coming into a building like that, and that's just one kind of extreme example. If Conway or someone wanted to build a building to the standards in the district and come in there, you couldn't tell them no, but good luck, having that business model take place out of a building like that. Now, it's not to say that there aren't appropriate areas for those types of things in the township. There absolutely are. And they're already on our zoning and our future land use map. But that's one example of how, a building type can implicitly govern sort of the range of uses that take place within the building. That's not to say that there's no space for use designations, in a form-based code, or in this case, a form-based district, that's part of a zoning ordinance that, is fundamentally use-based, in the township. And so, I think for this discussion, Dan and Vidya and I have kind of taken a preliminary look at, what some of the uses might be, especially in terms of principal versus accessory uses in some of these various parcels, And I think one of the main, some of the main things that have come up in our subcommittee meetings are about having a parcel where, for example, the rear of the parcel gets developed with some of these buildings that are, accessory in nature. Hypothetically, that parcel gets split, and then what happens to those buildings? Does there still need to be a tie between, a principal and accessory use if those parcels get split? I think that's something that's come up. I think another thing is we would need to add a few new definitions, use definitions, into the existing zoning ordinance as part of rolling this out. So, for example, having artisanal manufacturing added and defined, in the zoning ordinance. I think maybe, Dan, there were a couple other ones that you had identified as well. But we could go into artisanal manufacturing. We could go into any of the other ones if you think that's appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to just, on that point about zoning, with a form-based code like this, you can have a really wide net of permitted uses that you then have to keyhole into building types, and that's how you can provide some limits on the use. That being said, there's nothing that's going to prevent us from restricting the list of uses that'll be allowed district-wide. So we've taken a preliminary look at it, just like Adam said, and what you're likely to see is a recommendation for, the wide variety of residential use types, a fairly wide variety of commercial use types. But then when you get into things like manufacturing, we're still not going to recommend heavy manufacturing or even light manufacturing as it's currently defined in the zoning ordinance necessarily. As Adam mentioned, what you're more likely to see is a definition for a specific type of manufacturing that might be called artisanal manufacturing, that fits into a small building footprint that involves creation of craft goods, maybe culinary goods, maybe jewelry, maybe woodworking, but is typically not done with heavy machinery. So those are the kinds of definitions that we need to kind of refine, but otherwise our current zoning ordinance has a pretty good palette of uses that we're going to, we can present to you and select from, just like we have for the mixed use district that's currently in the zoning ordinance, which was geared toward the Belleville Road area. That zoning district, it's called the mixed use district in our zoning ordinance right now, has a pretty wide variety of permitted uses, permitted special land uses that then get funneled into different building types, just like you're seeing recommended here. There will be probably a lot of overlap with the types of uses that you're going to see allowed on Belleville Road, but with the building types that we just went over, you'll see more context appropriate development here in this part of the township for Sumpter Road, where on Belleville Road, you'll see more large scale commercial and retail buildings. So with that being said, one of the next steps of this process is to go through our recommendations for a zoning plan. We will continue to work through that as we create the draft plan here. And then along with that, as you see on Belleville Road, there's going to be recommendations, overlay district recommendations, which will ensure that there are some basic architectural and landscaping design standards that apply district-wide. And so just like we have the B-ROD, you're likely to see a recommendation for a maybe an S-ROD or a Sumpter Road overlay district that has certain unifying design characteristics that would be applied to the lots in this area. So those are the kinds of details that we're working through with the zoning plan that will be presented to you in when we bring forward the full draft. But we just wanted to introduce those concepts here tonight. Any questions on how that all works in terms of zoning? I'm going to go through my list here of participants I have up on the screen, and then we'll go right back into the last couple of slides here if nobody has any questions. All right, I see no hands raised. Let's move on to Adam. We have a couple of other slides about the rural settlement areas that are on the plan. If you want to just go over those briefly.
Sure. I threw these on at the end, and this is a good enough place to talk about them. When we talk about Sumpter Rural Settlement, I think these two diagrams look fairly familiar. But this is kind of a visual concept, for what that might look like. So again, those areas under the rural residential kind of zoning allow for one dwelling unit per acre. If you were to cluster those and various ways that preserve some open space, you could still keep that 1 unit per acre, but it becomes gross density, meaning that you could still get the same number of residential units that sort of are vested into the zoning currently, but they're arranged in a way that preserves some of that open space. So each of those lots are not 1 acre lots. They're smaller lots, and the margin is taken back over by either preserved open space, or in this case, this is sort of a greenway type concept. And again, you can see the more commercial and mixed use buildings clustered there closer to Sumpter and Hall, generally where what we call anchor parcels would be. And then Dan, if you go to the next one, you can see the hamlet idea, which personally, this is my personal favorite for that, because it really mirrors the kind of pattern that you see there in the Cheney subdivision. And it just kind of mirrors that pattern over on the south side of Hull. And it's even possible, actually, for a residential settlement of a certain size to be served by a community septic system, if it's done correctly, if it's clustered appropriately. So there are ways to do it without, allowing for kind of the standard kind of large lot cul-de-sac served, rural residential subdivision to predominate on these lots. And I think that's in keeping with really kind of the principal concern we heard over and over again from people that live in the areas, that, they want to see a balance of, development with open space preservation. And so I think a hamlet concept like this, for the rural settlement area, that kind of preserves some sort of small lot sizes, smaller building footprints, and maybe a connected street network. And when I'm thinking street network, I'm really thinking streets, that are modeled after Cheney Street, for example, very, realistically sized street footprint. And, combine that, it's not really shown on this kind of concept, but combine that with development of those 2 anchor lots in the way that we spoke about earlier.
So I think we're at our last slide, and this is an opportunity for any lingering thoughts from the planning commission or from the audience about where we're going with this plan. I guess I'll add one thing about those last two slides. The way that that will have to be, there's a way that we have to implement that kind of a thing. We have a current zoning district called agricultural and estates where that's what almost everything south of Hull Road, except for along Rawsonville Road, is currently zoned, and that allows for a mix of predominantly residential uses, some institutional uses like churches, religious buildings. But that district standard would still apply in all likelihood on those parcels. But what we're trying to do is enforce that there's a design standard that applies so that, as Adam said, they're not just conventionally developed in sort of a sprawling manner. And so what you'd see there is probably something in the zoning ordinance that links those parcels specifically to some of these unique design characteristics that you see presented tonight. And it could be the option of the developer to choose one, but we want to make sure that there's a linkage to those residential areas surrounding the corners in this district to have some comprehensive design features. So that's something that we can accomplish through zoning. That being said, getting through the details, now we can just open it up to general discussion and talk about next steps and wrap things up.
And I'd just like to say, it's great job on the presentation. Great job putting that together, Adam. Thank you so much. And to the committee, it looks like you have all put a lot of hard work into it, and we had a lot of concerns that appear to be addressed already. So it's my comment so far is I'm really happy with the concept and the hard work everybody's been putting in.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Thanks to the committee, thanks to Adam, thanks to Dan. You've done a good job. It's been a good, it's just too bad we can't go in and bulldoze all the things we don't like so that we could really start new and have it all look really pretty, but I know that's going to take a long time. I think Belleville has really struggled with their areas on that area, especially with that one shopping center. Most of it's nothing there anymore, and further up, there's just a lot of empty space there that, yeah, we just need somehow to get it down so it can make it look nice real quick. But you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I concur with that. Very nice presentation, and you could see that a lot of work was put forth in it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. I do see a hand raised now from Chief Robinson over in the city of Belleville. So why don't we let Chief Robinson in, moderator? And there we go, Chief Robinson, you can unmute. Thank you.
Thanks. Just something that, as you addressed this to the commission, and I brought this up in our meeting that we had last week, something that when you are mixing residential, agricultural, commercial, all in this footprint, you might want to, when you talk about zoning, doing certain things that would prevent like a situation with, the marijuana industry. And why I warn you of that is I know that you're an opt-out community, and that's been successful so far, and for any kind of retail or commercial establishment. But if you have some solid business storefronts going in some of these zones that are, the artisan style, etc., if you do then have, 3 of these stores in a row, and then all of a sudden you have somebody that decides they want to build a residence there, and they build their residence there, and then behind their residence, they put 4 or 5 artisan style buildings. And if that individual decides that they want to be a medical marijuana caregiver, and knowing that medical marijuana caregivers are allowed to basically cultivate 12 plans for every patient that they have. We'll call them patients for the medical marijuana. And you might find every single building in that behind that residence, which we can't prevent due to the Michigan law, them having that in their residence, because as we know that every resident is allowed to do that. But to have that in the middle of your business district, there may want to be you may want to seek some legal opinions on how you zone certain things, especially when you're mixing agricultural, residential. And I'm not going to say that you would allow greenhouses, etc., but that could be a challenge. But those artisan-sized buildings, that's just something that I brought up in our meeting the other day, and I thought that it's something that is worth bringing up again, just to make sure that you're not having a lot of real nice, art related and residential stuff mixed in there, and then all of a sudden you get something that you can't prevent. And to try to nip that in the planning buds, no no pun intended, but that is something that I think is important to consider.
Thank you, Chief Robinson. I will reflect that. Yeah, very good points that you brought up last week, and that's a good thing for the Planning Commission here at large as well. And right now, we're fortunate that we have solid zoning mechanisms to handle how we can regulate those things. And as you alluded to, there are some areas of the state law that no township or city can really regulate perhaps as much as they would like to. And one of those areas is the individual caregivers under the 2008 law. Currently, our zoning ordinance restricts those activities to residential uses and zoning districts, I believe. So that's one thing to continue to look out for if we're now inviting a mixed use district, to make sure there's still a strong linkage to only perhaps residential building types that as defined in our or residential uses of property as defined in our permitted uses table elsewhere in the zoning ordinance. So it's those kinds of loopholes we want to make sure we address as we get through the zoning plan. It's a really good point. And another good point that was brought up that you brought up last week is the idea of separating and as Adam brought up really earlier, separating barns and other accessory buildings on those deep lots from what ends up maybe getting split on the frontage. We want to make sure there's clear zoning definitions to ensure that those barns don't just become, for example, standalone storage sites for somebody off-site to come and store things in. Those are the kinds of recommendations we need to make sure we think about, in depth. And we'll present some things to the Planning Commission. I want the Planning Commission to continue to think about those things as well.
Would those kind of issues be addressed in more of a zoning plan draft?
Exactly. Yep. That's something that we will be working with our faithful colleague, our principal planner, who's also attending tonight in more of the background role tonight, Vidya Krishnan. We will be talking more in depth with Vidya and Adam about the zoning plan and presenting that as part of the full draft at an upcoming meeting.
What are your next steps? You thinking there, Director Power, zoning plan, or are you going to come with a draft of an overlay district document? What's the order of operations in your mind?
I think we're at the point where we have a background in everything that's going to be in this plan. And so we intend to bring a full draft of the plan document, which would include the zoning plan and overlay district recommendations. There will probably be a separate effort to actually write the ordinance for the overlay district and the zoning ordinance section for the Sumpter mixed use district. But we'll be able to bring all the summary components together in a full draft plan document in an upcoming meeting.
Thinking a meeting of the subcommittee or a full Planning Commission meeting?
I will leave that up to our chair. I would be happy to have another meeting with the subcommittee before we have another meeting with the Planning Commission to go over those things.
I would defer to the subcommittee. If they're ready to have a plan put together and have it presented to everybody, would be good with that. I know I've met quite a few times already, so they may be ready to start putting forward some of the work and getting us a chance to look at a final or draft of a final.
My only comment with that before we think about that is, will we do, or is part of this process, will we do like a community engagement again? Or will we have to do that after we've put our draft together? Because one thing that I saw, it was very, very evident, is that there was a lot of misunderstanding about what we were doing with the last community engagement. There was a lot of people that were there and they had a lot of bad information. So I just feel like if we can get ahead of that to explain why we're doing what we're doing, it would help the community understand, and maybe they'll have some input. Maybe they won't like the Hamlet style residential setup. Maybe they will. I just want to make sure that the residents understand why we're doing what we're doing, so that we get their support and that the bad information will die. The bad news will die. And the truth about why we're doing what we're doing will come to the surface.
That's a good thought, Commissioner Atchison. So over the course of this effort, we've kept a listserv of all the residents who we've had email contact from. I've been sure to include them on all the invites for these meetings and inform them of an updated website that has all the meeting information and presentations on it. But it would be a good idea moving forward to continue to make sure there's information out there about that, whether it's press release or information on the website, and targeted outreach to the residents who have been involved and the stakeholders who have been involved. Now that we have a more solid future land use recommendation and regulating plan, we can certainly extend the outreach again.
Could we do that with circulating that initial draft? Give them, and when you're sending out with the listserv, you can send a link of here's what we're looking at. Please get us some feedback before it comes up before the board.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll say also with the state law will require that we have another public hearing about this after it's gone through a 2-month review process. So there's definitely going to be another public hearing on the topic, but no reason we can't get input before that point.
I really like the idea of getting ahead of the problems before they come up to the public hearing, though, because if you have everything set and the concerns addressed, it's a great idea to start getting rid of some of the negativity around what we're doing. So, Director Power, I think we have public comment, but we already do we have any other people for a public comment this evening? Are there any other commissioners that have any comments on what we're looking at?
I see no hands raised at this time.
All right, well, if we have no other comments from public or from commissioners, I think we can probably close out the work study and move back into finishing the rest of our agenda for the evening. I had a motion to end the work study this evening.
I move to close our work study session.
I'll support.
Yeah, motion by Commissioner Atchison, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or questions, modifications regarding the motion? Seeing as there is none, could we please have a roll call?
Allie Barr,
Yes.
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes. Right, and motion passes. That brings us up to our last item for the evening. It's general discussion and any updates. Director Power, do you have any updates or anything for general discussion this evening?
Only that there is not going to be a meeting in the fourth week of November, as it's the day before Thanksgiving. So the next meeting that we'll have will be December 8th.
All right. Any other commissioners have anything for general discussion, anything that they want to bring to the commission's attention? All right, seeing as there's none, have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Or motion by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Atchison. All in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, say aye.
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 Hi.
All right, the motion passes. Great job tonight, everyone. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing everyone in a few weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.